It's always a good time to know your rights and claim them. Why? Because we all day inside, Charlie.
Hello and welcome to another episode of We All Day Inside. This is season 3 and it's put together by Amnesty International Ghana. It is an HRE, a human rights education series. And my name is Nakai. I'm your host for today. To unpack today's discussion, we will be delving into Ghana's unfinished journey in the abolishment of the death penalty. And I have here on our experts panel 3 guests who would be sharing their knowledge and their expertise to reaching today's discussion. I'll start from my extreme right. Selina, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. My name is Selina Ayaw Kwapong. I'm the campaigns coordinator at Amnesty International Ghana, leading the human rights campaigns to help in solving human rights issues in Ghana and globally. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Selina.
My name is Divine Adongo. I'm the communications and project lead at Pax Africa. We work around promoting evidence-informed decision-making in terms of governance, climate change, and of course, prison-related advancement. I'm happy to be here and to contribute to this.
Happy to have you too, Divine.
And my name is Oliver Barker-Vormawor. I'm a constitutional and international lawyer with Merton and Everett. I also mobilize with Democracy Hub, which is a youth-focused, grassroots-related organization focused on bringing young people to be part of the political process and also creating a protest culture in Ghana.
Thank you very much, Oliver. From your introductions, we can all tell that today's discussion is going to be very rich because you are all experts in your fields. And so the title for today, or the theme for today, is Behind Bars: Prison Conditions, Torture, and Ghana's Unfinished Journey to Abolish the Death Penalty. Stay with us through this episode because it's a human rights issue. And when our rights are threatened, we are all affected because, Charlie, we all day inside. So we'll move straight into our discussion today. Back in 2023, July to be specific, after nearly 4 decades of campaigning, Ghana's parliament finally voted to abolish death penalty. What would you say was the turning point? I'll direct that to Oliver.
I think in many ways, there's a confluence of perhaps 2 things, I would say. One is that there's a moral buildup. And the moral buildup is since, I think, the late or somewhere in the 90s, we haven't executed anybody or implemented the death penalty in practice. And that practice build up in many ways then became part of our convention, that even though we had it on our books, we were not implementing it. Then connected with that is also the global campaign. And one of the things that is important to also understand is that there are certain things that can be floating about in the global atmosphere, which is, the conversations are enriched. But you need a local champion. And if you don't have a local champion who is putting pressure, who is trying to bring legislators to be able to take action on it, then ideas will float around, but nobody is taking charge of them. And that local champion, I think, and everybody can commend what Amnesty has done here in the country in terms of owning the process to ensuring that we bring legislators to be able to take this step. And I don't think that without Amnesty intervention, we're ever going to see this happen. But convention, the global movements, and also the local champion, all these confluence of things made it that we got here.
Right. Thank you very much for setting that stone. I would move to Divine. What do you think he has given us a very fair underlinement of what the turning point was, but what do you think was a turning point?
I would like to expand my big brother's take on it, especially on the moral compass to who we are as humans. If you read, and perhaps I'm a Christian, so permit me to come from that tangent. If you read the Bible, it tells us that that shall not kill. But we as humans decided that in Article 13 of our 1992 Constitution, we agree that everyone has a right to life. But we made exceptions to that. And the exceptions being that some crimes like high treason before the abolition of that, and treason could attract what? Death penalty, which means we've deviated from who we are as humans. So when that happened, abolishing the treason bit of it, minor offenses, I think it was a watershed moment for all of us. And as my big brother Oliver mentioned, that is because people championed, people advocated and pushed for those reforms. So for me, it's a progress we've made, but we still have a long way to go. And I'm hoping that these conversations we are having, facilitated by Amnesty International, would help us achieve the overall picture or life that we want for ourselves.
That's absolutely right. I want to take it from Selina's angle as well, as someone with a campaigns background. What do you think the turning point was?
I would say that aside the advocacy and then constant push from Amnesty International, one crucial push was the private members' bill that was tabled before Parliament, led by Honorable Francis Sosu, who led this bill with push from Amnesty International. Was a very important role, and I think it made everything easier, and also it made the public aware about the death penalty and then their contributions towards it and its importance, the abolition of its importance in our constitution. So I think the private members bill was another great push.
The private members bill. I want to come back to Oliver. Right, 6 months after the Parliament voted for the abolishment, it didn't end there. 6 people were then sentenced to death as a penalty for treason. What do you think complete abolition of death penalty would really require?
I mean, one of the things that we have to accept as folks interested in, pushing the bounds of human rights is understanding as much as law protects rights, law also creates conditions for where injustice thrives. And one clinical example is in terms of the interaction between the constitution, law, and also the processes for how a complete abolition would take. In Ghana's case, it is written within the constitutional document itself that, as Divine was pointing out, inhabits an internal contradiction in that it protects life, but licenses the taking away of life. So yes, we would need constitutional reform to be able to take it out of our legislative books. But also we need public consensus around this idea. Why? Because one, to be able to amend the provisions here, we need to take it to a referendum. For people to agree that we have to take out provisions that prescribe the death penalty for high treason and treason and those instances. And to achieve that, in my opinion, more generally, I think the process by which we disaggregate or remove from people's minds that the only way we can be able to express the seriousness of a crime is by putting the death penalty. I think that association continues to persist in so many minds where the death penalty is still seen as some form of deterrence. And so unless you break that connection, it's hard for you to be able to mobilize a broad section of people to be able to see the moral injustice of it. And it also means that we must innovate even in terms of lawmaking and think about how else can we express the seriousness of an offense without necessarily tying it into the taking away of human life. So the process will require constitutional reform. But because that requires referendum, it also requires that educations like this continue to be able to ensure that there's broader public awareness, and so that when the question is put at referendum, a lot of people would support it when we get there.
Absolutely. There are people in Ghana who believe that for serious crimes, they include serious crimes, death penalty is the best.
Yeah.
But what does the evidence really say?
Yeah.
Let me go to Divine, but then I'll come back to you for your thoughts on that.
That is an interesting question, and let me take it from two tangents, the individual perspective and perhaps a governance perspective. If we think of it from the individual perspective, an example, an armed robber decides to go and rob someone. The probabilities that armed robber is contemplating includes what? Being successful at what he wants to do, being what? Arrested by the police, or being shot and killed. Because if you're an armed robber, certainly there will be a counterattack. So you may be killed. Having these three contemplations, but the person will still go out there and what? Rob the person or the facility he or she wants to rob.
Yeah.
What that means is death, it's already part of the contemplation before some people commit certain crimes. So if death is a deterrent to what? Crime, that person wouldn't have gone out at the first place. So death penalty in itself is not a deterrent. And globally, it hasn't been what? Verified or established that death penalty is a deterrent. Now let's take it from the governance perspective. The 2023, they abolished treason, but not high treason. Now look at the offenses within the treason bit. If you engage in armed robbery leading to the death of someone, murder, all these things fell under what? The treason bit that we've abolished, that we won't use death penalty as a deterrent.
Yeah.
Then we look at the high treason that is still what? That still comes with what? Death penalty. If you attempt to overthrow a democratic government, if you try to what? Carry out a coup. Now look at these things. Are we saying that an attempt to overthrow a democratic government is far more dangerous than killing someone, a human life? And my big brother here fell victim to that. He suffered something that it's not proven. So, but the government is saying that just a mere suspicion, someone could attract what? High treason punishment than someone who goes to commit murder, treason. So if you look at both sides, what we abolished and what we still maintain, not to sound political, but the high treason offenses seeks to what? Safeguard government. And who are the government? If we talk about government, it's politicians. So unless we start to educate ourselves and let people know what at all is the high treason offenses and what at all that we abolish as treason offenses, what do we value most in society? Is it murder or is it suspicion? We have to educate people on these things for them to understand before we can rally the citizens and push for an amendment to take it out completely.
Yes. The citizens need to be educated. They need to be sensitized. Oliver?
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking, I remember, in the 2010, 2011, when we first did the constitution review process, and this question came up as to whether or not we should maintain the death penalty. And surprisingly at the time, a lot of people were calling for the expansion of the death penalty to cover, not only LGBTQ, but also armed robbery instances and things like that. So it showed that there was a social disconnect in terms of, how global conversations were evolving, how societies were becoming more progressive on the issue of the death penalty. But the conservatism that we were seeing within Ghanaian society, that we haven't sufficiently engaged people as to undermine belief in the fairness of the death penalty as appropriate punishment in many respects. So the overwhelming social response was to continue to maintain that. But like I was saying, I think that people want to find a way to express where they find the most revulsion for something, that we dislike something. And so they have to be able to think of punishment that is commensurate. And for some reason, even though in their daily personal lives, they themselves hate the idea of murder or killing people, they feel like, okay, what is the consequence we should attach to a person who has done something that we find so morally repulsive? Then let us engage in the same conduct that we find repulsive. There's an internal contradiction there somewhere. So we have to be able to reorient society and think about the ends of punishment. What is the ends of punishment? If it's to reform, then we are not necessarily achieving reform of an individual for the better of society by applying such draconian measure. But and that takes a long-term build-up for people to be able to lose belief in the idea that, the death penalty even works or is even appropriate. Like Divine said, we've seen across the board in many countries that the inverse relationship exists. Where the death penalty exists, we see more crime rather than the opposite. And people have to be able to see that kind of data to believe that, no, maybe we should experiment with different ideas in terms of our criminal justice.
Well said. Selina, so prior to today's episode, I had the privilege to engage some students, which is youth, the largest population, and on the abolishment of the death penalty, whether they support it or not. And through the conversation, I discovered that some of them believe that it is only right that someone who commits murder is also given death penalty as a punishment. What is it like for you from the campaign's view when you get to the grounds and you are campaigning? What are some of the issues that arise and the challenges that you face that you think that it should be looked at in a different way?
Okay. So I think most of the times people view the death penalty as a form of revenge, actually. That if somebody has committed murder, then they should also be killed in place of taking another human's life. But then, just like Oliver mentioned, we would need to do constant education and then create awareness, massive awareness on this death penalty issue. Because statistically, the issue of death penalty hasn't brought down the commission of crimes or offenses. Even when you kill somebody in place of taking another person's life, the offenses that people commit, whether murder, armed robbery, and any other linked offenses, keeps increasing. They don't come down. So I think this is one of the things we need to do. Education. Yes, massive education. Let people know that in thinking of revenge, we still have crimes going on.
Right.
And there's not going to be much of a difference, even if the death penalty is still being used.
In all your submissions, one thing I realized was consistent was that the people need to be sensitized. She spoke of education and you all implied that as well. Now, I want to move to at the point of abolition. Data says that 176 people were on death row. As of 31st December last year, 2025, the latest data from the Ghana Prison Service indicates that 87 death sentences were commuted to life sentences in 2025, making the number stand at 91, 88 males and 9 females, with no executions carried out and no new death sentences given in 2025. What barriers remain to ensuring death sentences is completely a thing of the past? Oliver.
Well, I think the first one is the backlog, meaning that before we got to this point, persons who have been in the system were facing the death penalty. And the only way in which to deal with that is only through the grace of the prerogative of mercy that the president applies in commuting sentences. Parliament could have, in the process of passing the law, saying that any persons who had been prior convicted or subject to murder would automatically, in the framework of the law, be given substituted as life sentences. But we didn't do that with that one. So it means that, one, for those backlog, we have to go through the presidency route and continue to pray on the president to apply the prerogative of mercy to pardon and commute. The second thing is also closing the tap. Okay, and the tap still exists in the framework where the Constitution allows the death penalty to be applied to certain kinds of offenses. And so unless you shut the tap, it means that it's still going to continue to drip. And even if it is in small numbers, it still exists. And we know, the way in which you want to completely uproot something, like we've been able to achieve at the global level with certain kinds of diseases, yours, maybe to some extent polio, is that it has to be completely uprooted out. And so constitutional reform, and gladly we are in the process of constitutional reform, and those conversations arrive, that the government would sponsor a process where the death penalty, the tap is closed and Ghana becomes free and rid of the death penalty, I think.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Divine, let's hear from you as well.
I think Oliver already touched on the most crucial bit of it. That is the backlog. How do we deal with that, and how do we stop ourselves from doing more? I think what is left now is that we have to act with urgency. Myself, Selina,
Selina.
yes, Oliver, we have to act with urgency in terms of advocacy, education to push for, especially now that the constitutional review process is still going, to make sure that there's amendment to close the tap. We have to also carry out advocacies in terms of how do we pardon some of the those who are currently in prison for death penalty. If it has to take presidential pardon or any other approach that we could convert them to life imprisonment instead of the death penalty. That is what we must do, and it must be done urgently.
Absolutely. The mention of prisons brings me back to the issue around the capacity that the prisons in Ghana can take. So data tells us that the Nsawan prison was built for 700 people, and currently it holds nearly 4,000. And in Kumasi Central as well, it was built for 400, and currently it holds 2,000 people. What does this say about what life actually looks inside these prisons? I'm directing it to Divine.
All right, thank you very much. That is an interesting question, and I think the recent stakeholder meeting we convened together with Ghana Prison Service, University of Science and Allied, University of Science and Allied, yes,
and Allied Science,
yes, exactly. Thank you, and University of Southampton, we discussed this issue. Now, interestingly, the Article 15 of the 1992 Constitution guarantees human dignity and fair treatment. But our prisons, do we uphold that? Does it mean that if you are imprisoned, your dignity ends at the gate? No. But when we enter into the prison, like you intimated, a prison made for 700 inmates, then you're having 4,000 inmates. What that means is you are subjecting them to inhumane treatment. And that is because it has been overlooked for decades now when it comes to policy, when it comes to financing, when it comes to advocacy. We've not shed more light on the prison reality. We think it is just a purview of the prison service to take care of inmates, but it goes beyond that. Policymakers have to constantly think of them and how they can bring policies that would help the system. Health service, the Ministry of Health, they have to think of how they could expand health service into those areas. And that also would speak to data. Do they have data on the health issues of the prisons? So that is it. We have to constantly keep them in our conversation at policy level, at health level, at advocacy level, to make sure that we expand services to them and also expand structures. And to add before I complete, the difference between the urban prisons and the rural prisons, it's the numbers. So you have overcrowding within the urban prisons, but if you go to most of the rural prisons, there are spaces there. So we have to also think of structural adjustment. How do we make sure that we spread out prisoners? We have to take out minor offenses. Someone who can't pay 500 cedis fine is still locked up. Someone who is still waiting for trial is locked up for 2 to 7 years. We have to look at all these ones and also introduce non-custodial sentences. Where I come from in the Upper East region, if you commit any offense, they would ask you to either clean a public facility, weed, do something. Now imagine a young person having a crush in the community, he stole something and they ask him to weed in the community. Everybody's passing and looking at him. He will never do that crime again. So non-custodial sentencing is one of the deterrents that we could actually use, but we've overlooked it for some time now. Yeah.
That's absolutely true. Selina, I see you nodding a lot as he was submitting. Would you like to add anything?
Yes. So we need to look at proper prison reforms and then even our justice system. Just like Divine mentioned, people on remand for 2 to 7 years. It's a very long time. All these issues add up to the numbers in the prisons. And also we need to look at reintegration services. People who are done serving their sentences, but then are still inside the prisons due to issues of stigmatizations when they come outside the prisons. So what do we have for ex-convicts? How do we reintegrate them into society without them being stigmatized? We need to look at these things carefully and then recommend effective solutions for them. One thing that would also help is the non-custodial sentencing. I think people who commit petty crimes or offenses shouldn't be there in the prisons, because if we are looking at providing proper housing system for prisoners, this is one of the things that we can really look at, non-custodial sentencing, and then it can help with maybe reducing the numbers in the prisons. Yes, as well as the people on remand. It's a very critical issue that we need to look at. Why is somebody on remand for a very long time and they haven't been tried, but then they are serving in the prisons already? We really need to look at these with critical lenses.
Absolutely. Oliver, I'm coming to you. We're still on the issues of prisoners or persons in prison and how that life is like for them. According to Barker-Vormawor, the research found that people sleep in tents, 100 to a cell designed for 10, and surviving on barely $1 a day for food. Despite the recent government increase, some even depend on family visits for food and medicine. What then happens when families can no longer visit?
These for me are lived experiences. Not only do I work with persons who are within the criminal justice systems, I have, in the course of my human rights advocacy, also been put in jail. And I've lived those conditions. I've seen how people are kept in those cells. I've seen, spaces which is inadept for 5 people, housing 40 and 50. So these are things that I've witnessed. And it seems to me on a general level that as a societal issue, we haven't sufficiently internalize what it means for a person to live in dignity, and our responsibility, even as persons who are superintending over a criminal justice system, what it means to be able to construct a system that preserve the dignity of those that those systems hold. But we ourselves who are doing these things, what does it say of us to be able to look into human beings put in these conditions and be fine with it? I've seen and been witness to individuals within these cells who are not able to afford food for themselves, who are at the mercy of other inmates who are there to try to give them something or whatever it is. In fact, in one of my things in jail, that the first ever hunger strike, in connection with the fact that people were not being fed in the cells, was organized by myself within the cells during the last time I was arrested, where over 40 people within these cells for 3 days refused that those who could afford it were not going to eat because they wanted everybody else fed in the cells. So this is a huge problem. It's an issue that we've carried on in terms of advocacy, in terms of the recent constitution review process, in recognizing the right to food for people who are within these systems. But a fundamental point, and I think Divine and Selina touched on it completely, which is that if we don't have an integrated process of how we decongest the cells, we're going to have a problem. I am an abolitionist myself. I know that there's so many people having gotten there, I don't believe in prisons more generally in terms of how we hold human beings. But even in terms of the systems we have in place, one, from the sentencing regimes that we have some of the most disproportionate penalty systems for petty offenses. That is it. So it's a personal thing to me because I've lived this. So many of the people there are friends of mine. There's a right to cooling. We don't have, as a society, what is the minimum structure of what a prison cell or a police cell or a prison should look like, so that we ensure that it meets minimum standards of how ventilation flows within itself to be able to minimize sickness that flows and recycle themselves within these spaces. You know, we don't have proper healthcare facilities for people who are within there. In terms of the food hygiene content of the food that is produced there, there's no minimum standards of what it must look like or meet. Everything is just left as if the process is intended to dehumanize. But what does it say of we ourselves to be able to create a system where we are committed to the dehumanizing of others like us? You know, at the end of the day, do we become less human through that process? So for me, it requires a champion. It requires people who are, you know, stay on this issue and push government and push institutions to be able to ensure that we achieve prisons that reflect what kind of message and what kind of story we want to tell of ourselves as a people.
Thank you very much for sharing. That was so insightful, and you hit straight at the nail. We are still on behind bars, prison conditions, torture, and Ghana's unfinished journey to abolish death penalty. We'll take a quick break. This is season 3 of We All Day Inside. We'll be right back.
It's always a good time to know your rights and claim them. Why? Because we all day inside, Charlie.
For the first time in history, a bill put before Parliament in the year 2024 could be reintroduced and passed into law to criminalize abuses linked to these accusations. This is a quest to defend human dignity for all, especially those who have been accused, abused, and neglected. This human rights education series tells the stories of survivors of witchcraft accusations living in camps across the north and northeast regions of Ghana. Join Amnesty International's Branded for Life campaign in Ghana to help end human rights abuses and violations due to witchcraft accusations.
It's always a good time to know your rights and claim them. Why? Because we all day inside, Charlie.
Welcome back to today's episode. We're still on behind bars, prison conditions, torture, and Ghana's unfinished journey to abolish the death penalty. Now, before we continue our discussion, we'd like you to listen to a Vox poll that was recorded ahead of today's session before we react to them. Hi. Do prisoners deserve human dignity even after committing serious crimes?
Yes, I think they deserve human dignity even after committing serious crime.
Why?
Because most legal systems and the religious teachings hold that prisoners still deserve human dignity even after committing serious crimes. The idea is that punishment should remove a person's freedom, right, when necessary, but not their basic humanity. So this means that prisoners should still have rights such as access to food, healthcare, safety, and then fair treatment and protection from torture or abuse. So when we look at the United Nations, they created Nelson Mandela rules which was called what? Is it the United Nations? Yes, the United Nations standard minimum rules for the treatment of prisoners. So in this rules, it stated that all prisoners must be treated with respect for their inherent dignity and value as human beings. And so in most democratic societies and international law frames, the general principle remains that committing a crime does not remove a person's basic. But to me, I agree that prisoners deserve human dignity even after committing serious crime. Thank you.
So when you look at our current state in Ghana, is that what is happening? Would you say that is like what is happening in the country?
No.
Why do you think that is so?
Because right after they are being released from this cells or prison, even societies then neglect them. They are neglected by society as well, and then basically.
Okay. Thank you very much. Hi.
Hello.
Do you think prisoners deserve human dignity even after committing serious crimes? If yes, why? If no, why?
Honestly, I don't think so. Depending on the crime and the degree of the crime, especially, some people I can afford some people some kind of grace, depending on like their situation in the context. But to speak generally, I don't think so. I don't think they deserve anything.
But human rights are supposed to be enjoyed equally by everyone, regardless of whatever circumstance you might be in. You being convicted only limits you, like, in particular terms. Does it mean that your dignity, like whatever happens to you after your conviction, shouldn't matter to anybody at all? That you don't deserve good health, right to life. Like, in prison, people murder and all that. All those things shouldn't be considered because of a serious crime you've committed, in quote.
Maybe you can give me examples of the serious crime. But yes, as I said, depending on the degree of the crime, the extent to which they went to, right? I would say some people don't deserve it and some people do, right? I think I can't objectively say it's sure, but subjectively, I don't think some particular people deserve any kind of human dignity.
Okay, so let's say someone who commits murder, like, continually. That is like a very serious crime. You think that person doesn't deserve dignity after being caught and convicted?
No, not at all. Because the dignity we are going to afford them is we the taxpayers who is going to take care of it. Why should I now be taking care of somebody who decided to kill people?
Okay, so from your response now, I want to know what you think about human rights. Who do you think is entitled to human rights, like generally, on a flat scale?
I think everybody, but some people's rights should be taken away, definitely.
Interesting. Thank you very much, Niall. So those were the sound from students across certain selected areas in Ghana. I mean, there weren't too many, but these were selected few. You could see that they all have different thinking, different perception about whether persons in prisons deserve to be treated with dignity or not. I would like to hear from you three so far, listening to what they had to say. What do you think? I mean, we opened the discussion around what Ghanaians think and all that. This is the youth. These are the people who are later going to be the leaders of the country. And this is what they think about persons in prisons and dignity. What do you have to say about it, Oliver?
Oh, there's a lot one could talk about it. But I think one of the things which struck me is that there's a high sense of awareness of the disconnect, the social disconnect or social reality being disconnected from the legal standards demanded. That comes true. So you can see across board, there's a sense of, okay, this is what dignity requires, but that's not what we are seeing in our society. And I would have loved for the number of them to question, perhaps on an individual level. And I think in terms of the interviewer did probe, why do you think that is? But I didn't see a sense of any of them questioning the role society has to play in able to push these institutions to reform themselves for the better. But I'm fascinated by the level of social awareness of that there's a disconnect between what we promise on paper and what people's reality more generally is. And of course, I think that in every social demographic, you're going to have a wide range of different perspectives in terms there. But on a broader level, I'm encouraged by the level of general awareness of what is required, even if there's a disagreement as to who should benefit from that. I thought it was also quite interesting that someone was proposing that it is better for somebody to be killed rather than me to feed the person. You have these kinds of instances, but these are things that we interrogate, and you want to invite this kind of debate and back and forth, I would say.
Right. Divine, let's hear from you too.
First of all, let me admit that I'm impressed. I think some of the students are well informed on the topic. And if I'm taking it from that tangent, and linking it to what we started with, the need for advocacy and awareness. When we listen, the first two students, one of them talked about Article 14, Article 15 of the 1992 Constitution.
Fortunately, we had someone with he was reading law.
Exactly.
Yes. So
and he talks about protection of human dignity, and that followed with what? Awareness, how that should be manifested. The second person talked about the UN provisions on human dignity. And you could tell that he insisted that human dignity must be preserved in all situations. Now, the third person who spoke out of passion, he didn't actually quote any provision that talks about these things. And you could tell the differences between their responses. Someone who is aware what a citizen is entitled to, and someone who is speaking out of what he thinks should be done. And I think that is what our society is governed with. Those who are supposed to protect human dignity are what? They use emotions and their own thinking to sort of take care of these people. And I think there are a lot of young people who think like the third person who spoke about the fact that we don't have to use our resources to provide dignity for people who commit crimes. There are a lot of people like that. So I want to avert their mind to something. The notorious armed robber mechanic, Yao Asante, who was imprisoned wrongfully and just got released. He suffered inhumane treatment for a crime he did not commit. And we have a lot of people who have suffered in the same fate. So he should avert his mind, or anyone who thinks like that should avert their mind to people who have passed through similar ordeals for crimes they've not committed. That is just the innocent bit of it. But even if we situate it to within those who have committed the crimes, they've committed crime, it doesn't change them to an animal. It doesn't rip them of their dignity. So awareness is what we should do, because I've seen the disparity. And I think if we create more awareness, a lot of more people will understand why we should guarantee dignity for people who even commit offenses.
Awareness is very important. Selina.
Okay, I would say that these are very expected comments. Like I mentioned earlier, people see prisoners or going to the prison as a revenge. And then, so if you are in there and you have committed a crime, it means that you shouldn't be offered any form of dignity. But then let's look at the wrong side of it, like Divine mentioned. There are people in there who have been convicted wrongfully and then are still in the prisons. Does that mean that because they are in prison, they should be subjected to torture? No, we need to look at that side too. So education, and then letting people know that the prison is a correctional facility. It's not a place to punish people.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree any less. So according to Barker-Vormawor et al. Again, the study found correctional officers contracting diseases of scabies, tuberculosis, influenza, and carrying them home to their families. One officer nearly lost 2 children because of such instance. How do we get people to understand that prison conditions are a public health crisis and not just persons in prisons problem? Because it goes beyond those in those facilities. There are people who go there to visit them, they come back. So it becomes a public concern, a public crisis, and not just those in those the prison facilities. I'll direct that to Oliver.
Perhaps my thoughts on this are a little different. I mean, I completely agree, of course, with the sentiment, but I think underlying it is this idea that we cannot have sympathy for another unless we are at risk of it, right? So the idea is persons within these institutions deserve themselves not to be sick, not to have these communicable diseases ravage the prisons services. And this is irrespective of whether or not we in the outer world are going to be affected by this crisis of health concerns ourselves. They deserve it themselves. And of course, when we get into this conversation, then it's because there's a failure of empathy and humanity somewhere, where the only way to generate this is to tell them that well, if you don't deal with the problem, you are likely going to suffer it as well. And that's when we want people then to have a sense of empathy. So unfortunately, that's kind of what the society we have created in many respects, but there's no denying that so many of the communicable diseases that, exist within the prison, prison institution regularly escape those prison boundaries and affect the general population in many ways. There's nothing that captures it for me like Asha's song, Mr. Jailer, that I'm a prisoner, you're a prisoner too. That we are all somehow enmeshed in the relationship of how you treat the other person in prison, because we're also interconnected with the prison life in many respects. And if that gives us the oomph or the momentum to be able to say we need to solve this problem because the wider population will be at risk, then whatever does it for us, we have to do it. On an individual level, I think that empathy can be generated, even if we ourselves fear that this could happen to us or not,
Right. There have been issues aside that have been caused by global or national crisis, for instance, climate. I want to come to Divine now. So according to PAX, research by PAX Africa, it examines how climate change is worsening conditions inside prisons. Ghana's temperature is rising, and these facilities have poor ventilation, as you have already established earlier. What are you finding, and how should climate resilience factor into prison reforms?
All right, thank you very much. Already we spoke about the structures of our prisons. First of them is the ventilation issue. There's no ventilation within the prison system. You talked about statistics where we have prisons made for 700 inmates, taking 400 inmates. That also leads to what? Congestion. Now, if you think of these existing challenges, issues that we are confronted with, then climate change comes to exacerbate them. So when you have people who are overcrowded, now we have the temperatures rising. That means there's increase in heat. So someone who is, when we had the stakeholder meeting, lived experience, one of our participants said that a cell that is made for 20 people is taking double of that. So if they are already feeling the heat, then the climate change causes temperature to rises, then that means it will become unbearable. And when it becomes unbearable, they are more prone to diseases. And when they are prone to diseases, what happened? Oliver said we ought to have known and take care of these people. But since we failed to do that, we are also at danger. Those who are attending to them, the health professionals, the prison guards, all those people, they are also in danger. They'll also be affected. And if they are affected, they are also going back to their homes. So that's how it keeps spreading. When we talk about the water-related causes of climate change, our producer talked about the fact that someone used a bottle of water to bath. How is that possible? It is not bathing. That's inhumane. And climate change exacerbates some of these things, that if the outside worlds are not getting water for themselves, are not getting clean water for themselves, how more or less someone who is in prison? So there are issues that we should have tackled, we failed, and now climate change is exacerbating them. So the earlier we take a look at them, the better for all of us, because it is estimated that in our part of the world, climate change would increase by 1 to 3 degrees Celsius by 2060. So if we don't take care of these challenges we were already confronted with, it is going to keep exacerbating, and we will find ourselves wanting.
Right. I'll move to Selina real quick. Amnesty International documented death row prisoners at Nsawam sharing 7 toilets, people with mental disabilities receiving no treatment, and juveniles being canned at a correctional center. When these things happen in state facilities, who is to be held accountable?
Okay. I would say that the state is to be held accountable, because when it comes to these issues, it starts from the arrest. When someone is arrested, I know they are assigned an officer to commence investigations into the crime committed. And when we look at the West, you would notice that we read in the news mostly that somebody was convicted of a crime maybe 3 decades or 4 decades ago, and then currently maybe it has been revealed that they were wrongfully convicted. But in our system here, we don't have our investigative officers doing so much of work like that. When you look at Crime Check Foundation's prison documentary series, you would notice most of the responses from inmates will tell you that, oh, my officer told me that once we get into court, just tell them, plead guilty to your crime. Even if you are not guilty, just plead guilty, and then your sentence will be reduced. This contributes to the decongestion state or the congested state, in our prisons. Currently, we even have juveniles who are supposed to be in different facilities, serving in the same facilities as adults, which isn't rightfully so. So the state should be held accountable for this. And because they need to provide maybe an annual reform, look at the numbers in there, provide more building facilities to host the current numbers that we have. Because it seems our prisons, the facilities we have currently were facilities that were built decades ago to host a smaller number. And as the population is increasing, we still have crimes increasing. And these facilities are hosting a bigger population now. So if our states are held accountable, or maybe the state institution responsible for prison reforms are held accountable, we can see a proper difference or change in our prison systems.
Absolutely. Oliver, let me pick your brain on the same matter. In such instances, who is to be blamed? She said the state.
I mean, I agree that the state has the primary responsibility in ensuring this. One of the ways in which we set up the framework of governance is that all of us collectivize our efforts through the state, so that it provides for us rights that we guarantee more generally. I don't think on the other level, it's not a question of responsibility. It's not a question of liability, but responsibility, which is where the public comes in as well. That we also have a sense of responsibility in pushing our institutions to make sure that they respect or they reflect our values. So if these social issues remain for a long time, if these problems are unsolved, then it's insufficient at some level as a civic responsibility to say that, well, the government is supposed to enforce the law or to provide these services, and it's not doing it, and so there's nothing we can do. It means that we have to be able to mobilize ourselves, whether we're putting ourselves into small clubs, networks that push and continue to demand change, then making sure that duty bearers continue to be able to pick up the slack when these things are failing. Then we have, I suppose, a civic responsibility in that regard, which is not necessarily legal liability, but an urging on us to be able to continue to push government to reflect who we are as a people.
Right. So I'll pose this to Divine and then yourself, but I would like to hear from Divine first. So in Ghana, you realize that some persons in prisons have been on remand for years, sometimes between 2 to 7 years. And it's only data tells us that we have fewer than 1 in 4 death row inmates who were able to appeal. What do you think is broken in the system, and what would fix it? What can we do to fix it as a country?
Thank you very much. And I think that's a sad reality. Someone who is awaiting trial, it's locked up for almost productive years. And for me, we first have to look at it from a structural perspective. We first have to look at it from dignity perspective and all that matters. First, the structures. We have to look at the justice system. Should we prioritize some of these cases? Because the Constitution says that you are not what? You can't be convicted until proven guilty. So if you can't be convicted until proven guilty, then why should you be locked up for more than a year? That's a lot of productive life that is being wasted. So we should prioritize people who are yet to be heard. Because that's also a natural justice principle. So everybody must be heard and heard on time. Justice delayed is justice denied. So we should expand our justice system to prioritize cases of that and have them heard. Secondly, we should prioritize the non-custodial sentencing system, where it will absorb some of these things. Another issue is poverty. Poverty exacerbates some of these things. We have a lot of people in the prison that are not able to afford what? Legal services. So we have to expand the legal aid systems. We have to get civil society organizations who can support them to find legal redress to their issues. Another aspect of it, which we want to work on, is legal awareness, legal literacy. Most people don't know their right, and like my sister mentioned, a police officer or your prosecutor telling you to plead guilty to have your sentence reduced, which is ridiculous. So if people know their right, know what to do when they are arrested, know where to push when they are not being heard, then they will be able to also fight for their rights. So I think it has to do with education, structural adjustment, and also financing for legal cases.
Absolutely. Oliver?
Well, I mean, I think that for me, I put the blame squarely on the laps of our judges. You know, I've practiced in many countries in the world, and Ghana is the only place where people jubilate and celebrate over bail. It's so routine, it's the most fundamental to avoid lengthy pre-trial detentions. And it's, you know, when you look at the numbers, when a person is unrepresented, then the chances of them being remanded is almost nearing 100%. You know, it's a routine thing that we do that the judges themselves do not bring to reality the idea that, you know, a person is entitled to pre-trial bail. And I've seen so many instances where a person will be denied bail for 4 or 5 months, and then on the set trial, they eventually give them. And I ask myself, what changed from the first time when they were first presented, and by the 6th month? The person has not changed. The circumstances of the case has not changed. But you have decided that we're using the bail as a punishment process, a pre-trial punishment process. So the problem is the judges. And so we create and compound a problem where, you know, there's so many people who are stuck on pre-trial detention or remand, as we call them. And every time they come before the court, instead of the court assessing and asking themselves about why is this person continuously being held, because to keep a person on remand is that you're answering for yourself the question that you cannot think of any kind of conditions you can impose as bail that will make this person show up for trial. That's what you are saying, essentially. There's no other way to ensure that the person shows up for trial in terms of the conditions I can impose. And I think, you know, a lot of work has to go into how we educate judges' attitude towards rights and personal liberty, how they view these kinds of cases. If not, and I've seen, for instance, the judiciary be involved in processes like Justice for All program, where they take judges after many years, people who've been, you know, pre-trial detention for 7 years. These are people who are going to court, their judges are seeing, the new judges will come and assess the case and give them bail on so you're creating a problem and then, you know, looking for funding to come and deliver some program out of it. I really don't understand it. So I think in terms of how judges are initiated and trained, there's a component missing in terms of the attitudes to pre-trial detention. That's something we have to think and reform as a society.
Right. Oliver believes that there's something amiss with how judges are being trained in the country, and he has justified why he thinks so. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. I really wish that we could delve deeper into the matters because this discussion has been very, very, very forthcoming. I would like to take your last words, but this should be for listeners who want to act based on our discussion today, looking at what is going on in the country and how issues are unfolding. What does Amnesty Ghana's campaign need from citizens right now? I'll start from Selina, and this would be your last words. So we'll take it briefly, then we wrap up.
Okay. So Amnesty International campaign, we need support from public, from the media to widespread our campaign and then our news. It creates and then it helps in the education process we have spoken about. So this is one major thing that we require from the media and then from everybody listening to us today.
Thank you. Divine.
Yes, in terms of the death penalty bit of it, I want to take it from the religious perspective. What I started with, that shall not kill. We've progressed in terms of abolishing some of the crimes that were under death penalty. I think we should let this fundamental principle in religion manifest or find expression fully in our constitution by abolishing high treason crimes that comes with death penalty. In terms of the prison conditions, let me say, love your neighbor as you love yourself. Under Article 14 of the 1990 Constitution, it says that we should protect human dignity. It didn't provide exceptions to what kind of crime that if you committed, you should be granted human dignity. It talks about it in generality. So I think we should get educated on some of these entitlements that people have and ensure we help secure it for them. So everyone should get educated. Everyone should help us push the Amnesty International campaign so we protect human dignity and abolish death penalty.
Right. Oliver, your last words.
I think that, systems don't change because law exists. There's a missing connection between our own social responsibility in ensuring that our society reflects our values and what kind of society we want to live in. And that means that we have to be intentional in joining clubs. We have to be mobilized in spaces, working together with existing organizations to ensure that change is realized. So whatever space within which you are, no one is an island. You have to be able to connect with other people who are like-minded. You have to find networks that are doing this kind of work and ask yourself, what ways can I support? And I think that we all have a responsibility to do a little more to change how society looks like.
We all have a responsibility in shaping society into what we want it to look like. Fortunately, we'll have to end today's episode. This has been an episode of season 3, We All Day Inside, and today we have delved into behind bars, prison conditions, torture, and Ghana's unfinished journey to abolish the death penalty. You can access this episode across Amnesty International Ghana social media platforms, either on X, YouTube, or even Instagram at Amnesty International Ghana. I am Nakai, and I've been your host for today. Looking forward to seeing you on the next episode.
It's always a good time to know your rights and claim them. Why? Because we all day inside, Charlie.